Hi everyone, and welcome back to Grow Great Live. And today we're sticking with our topic, our very fascinating topic about creativity. And we're exploring each of our own individual styles of creativity. How do we build and find our own creativity in our own lives? What do we do? And what do we do when we've hit a roadblock and we're not feeling the creative juices flowing? Antonia, I'd love to hear your thoughts. How do you build creativity into your life?
I think I think an eye-opener for me was how limited my definition of creativity started out as, and realizing that I had too narrowly defined what creativity meant or being creative meant. I had this concept of an artist in my head, and it looked very specific, and the artist like wore a scarf and painted and smoked cloves, right? Like there was this idea of like what a creative person is. And it dawned on me at a certain point that creativity, we've defined it in other, in other recordings. Creativity is the ability to problem solve in a novel new way, like to be able to come up with new conclusions. And you had defined it for yourself as the ability to basically come up with something new that has value. And so that's a really wide open, I mean, that's an ocean of possibilities there. So one of the worst things that I think I've done and I see happen is that we have a too narrowly defined concept of what creativity is. There's a fascinating book in looking through the lens of personality types. There's a really great book that was written by David B. Goldstein and Otto Kroeger called The Creative You. And it takes the 16 Myers-Briggs personality types and talks about how they uniquely express creativity. Because not everybody's going to express creativity in the same way, but we all do in some way. So being able to just, I mean, even if you don't read that book, just being able to understand that there are champions of creativity out there who understand that it comes in a variety of different ways. I look at my husband. He grew up being an artist. He grew up being a photographer. He grew up wanting to direct and produce movies, and he's a great production artist at this point. He loves to, to play with music, and he's a bit of a musician. And he's this avant-garde, artist in all these different ways. And I don't really do much of that at all. I mean, I grew up playing piano, but I wouldn't call myself like massively artistic. However, when you give me two models, right, two frameworks of how like the mind works, I can find a way to match those models in a completely unique way that helps people kind of have ahas about how they work and how their mind works. And I recognized my version of creativity is totally different than his, but they're equally creative. They're just creative in a different context. So I think one of the gifts that we can give ourselves is expanding our frame of how we define creativity and being able to recognize that we are bringing newness, like we're bringing novelty to the world. We're bringing novelty that has value. It doesn't even have to have necessarily like efficient value or effective value. It can just be beautiful, or it can be representational, or it can be just your story or whatever it is. But being able to have a wider definition of creativity, I think, helps us understand that we are each creative, even if we think we've lost it somewhere along the way. Even if we think our creativity was damaged, or I'm not a very creative person, you are creative. You actually are intrinsically creative. It's just a matter of being able to see it, give yourself permission to have it, use that muscle, and not too narrowly define that to synthetically manufacture limitations on creativity.
That's beautiful. That's really beautiful.
Yes, yes, love that. And so many of us are stuck in the model of an artist being the creative person, where there is, like we mentioned in one of the previous recordings, it's just it's an art skill. It's a life skill, the creativity, the one that is going to be more and more valued in the future. And I also think of myself. I never thought of myself as an artist. If anything, growing up, my father was more of a pragmatic side, and it was more of a day-to-day resourcefulness. How do we attack this problem? What are the different perspectives we can look at it, and how we can solve it? And if it wasn't for so that I kind of grew up with that, and that felt kind of natural to me, and it is today. If it wasn't for my mom to encourage me to write poems, to draw, to do, to write, read different books, I wouldn't know that I had access to that too. So, one day she will say, I've heard that they're giving awards for the best song. which is a book, which I love to read. Why don't you, write a couple of poems, submit it, and see what happens? And I did, and I won. So that was for me, at one point of my life, that's all what I did. I was writing poems, winning books, so I can read the books. So that was my motivation, to get something to read and to learn. And then the next time she will be like, you know what, I got you this scrap piece of paper. Why don't you go and try, drawing something outside? Which I did. And, it was very nice to me. It felt really, really good. And it was pretty good. So she will, hang it around the house. And so I knew that I had access to that too. However, throughout life, I always more navigated to the problem-solving creativity that I had within me that just came natural to me, and to this day. But then again, every now and then when I'm, in a boring meeting or, just at home, having the time, the boredom time that we mentioned in previous recordings, I will actually wipe out a piece of paper and I will draw something on it just because it makes me feel good. And it's a different type of, if you will, a brain resting from the day-to-day, solution-oriented creativity.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic, especially, building all the different ways that we build creativity and being able to take perspectives, right? That is a form of creativity, and it's but not in the form of dance and art necessarily, but still funneling into the same, probably highlighting the same parts of our brain. As far as creativity, I remember having a creative streak, not necessarily identifying with, the slanted hat and the scarf, but loving to write and loving to write poetry and write stories, and to express myself physically in creative ways. Like, we did a lot of drama growing up inside the household. We were always acting. Our parents were always acting themselves, and so we were very used to getting into our body. And we would imagine, my father would say, imagine you're a seed that's just been planted in the earth, and you're deep within the earth, and all of a sudden the sun is shining down on the earth and the water's pouring through, and how you would sit. And now we have to embody a seed, and now imagine that seed is about to take growth and burst through. I mean, you would have to, you were a seed in that moment and bursting through the soil. Or imagine you're a lion and you're chasing a gazelle, and now the gazelle is in its dying throes. Like, you might be the gazelle or you might be the lion. So it was a lot of body work to express ourselves and to be creative. But what was really interesting to explore is then a whole heap of time passed where I was like in my adult, and I never saw myself as creative. I didn't really identify. Creative was Martha Stewart, the people that were making little doodads for their house and nice cookies, and I was like, but that's not me. I don't do those things, so I'm not creative. And I had forgotten that I write, and I forgot, like, I do drama with my kids, but this was before my kids. And so there was this period of time where I didn't feel like identify with being creative. Even though I have a fundamental belief that all of us are searching and are meant to be doing something creative, and there's creativity. I mean, the software programmer is doing something creative. They're creating code, right? So, but then I noticed that in the first year of my son's life, I did something that felt completely Martha Stewart, something that I never thought I'd ever want to do, and that was create a scrapbook. But even though in the first year of a child's life you feel like, you're tired at times and you feel exhausted, somehow I would stay up till 1 o'clock in the morning creating a scrapbook. And when I finished at the end of that year, it wasn't just a scrapbook. It was, and I announced this to everyone on his first birthday as I passed it around as if it was a delicate baby, the most epic thing that I had created thus far in my life, other than my child, was the scrapbook. And the thing is, I didn't even identify myself with it. But then all of a sudden, I took so much care to do everything in it, and it was a work of art. And to this day, I wouldn't say that's, but it still stands in my mind. And so it was just interesting to explore how I viewed myself as a young girl, a period of time where I didn't feel very creative, even though I might have been doing creative things, and how I latched back onto it. And it was interesting even that it had to be a scrapbook for me to be thinking of myself as creative. I mean, there were many other things. But I just want to, as I pass it over to Antonia and get to our next question, is in the movie Lemony Snicket's, which is a really bizarre, dark comedy with Jim Carrey. But in the movie Lemony Snicket's, there's a line in it where one of the children says, "There is always a way. You just need to find it." And that, I saw that when my kids were quite young, and it has become like a mantra in our house, that there is always a way, you just need to find it. And that is now based on your resourcefulness. It leaves them no out. There's always a way to solve a problem if you can find it, which now puts all the onus, the existential onus, on us to figure out, how do I solve this problem? Because there's always a way. And I think right there is like really a testimony for creativity. How do you figure shit out, you know? But so that's creativity. But Antonia, I'd love to hear, what do you do when you're not feeling those creative juices flowing? Like you mentioned in our earlier like hour-long session that you write blogs and you're looking at different models. But what do you do when you're feeling like, I don't know, you're at a block? How do you triumph over it? Yeah.
I recognize that because I have to do so much creative work, there are times when I need to give that creative process a complete and total rest. There are times when I need to be fully, say, passively entertained, and I need to not like have to think about creativity. Most people don't have the, they don't have the privilege of being in as a creative job as I do. So I recognize that oftentimes it's more like people have sort of a mundane job, and then they just kind of get in that habit of doing that. And I would say it almost feels like it's not a toggle switch, it's not on and off, right? Obviously creativity can come in chunks and it can be gradient. But that said, if you're doing too much creativity and you feel like you have a creative block, honor that and just go, okay, I'm not going to be creative for a while. I'm just going to be totally like, mundane. And if you are in a habit of feeling mundane and that you're not creative at all, there's a couple different things that, because I'll go that direction too. I'll be like, well, I'm going to give myself a complete creative break and I'm not going to do anything. But then I'll get in a habit of like watching like crime shows, being passively entertained by crime shows, and then I'll like emerge and surface and be like, I don't feel very creative. I just want to watch TV some more. There's a couple things that that I've done as sort of daily habits to keep my creative juices going. One of them is that I love listening to books on tape or books on on MP3 or whatever while coloring, and coloring as I'm listening. I picked this up actually in 6th grade. My 6th grade teacher would have an hour of, or half an hour of reading a chapter out of a book, and he would set us up with geometric patterns and markers, and we would color the geometric patterns while he read to us. And that, it was just a, it's just a way of listening while keeping our, ADD occupied. But I realized if I always have something to, like geometric patterns to color as I'm listening to other stuff, I feel sort of like I feel like I'm giving myself the lowest barrier of entry for creativity possible. And you mentioned before that in a previous recording that it's not that you feel motivated and then you act, it's that you act and the motivation comes. So it's giving myself just a really low barrier of entry for creativity action, and then I find myself getting in the flow of it. So I think for me, it's not setting the barrier too high. It's not going, okay, I got to sit down and I've got to write this amazing blog post, or I've got to write this amazing, or I've got to figure out this incredible model. It's a matter of going, okay, so I want to get my creative juices flowing. What's like the simplest thing I can do that feels creative to me? Like, what's the lowest barrier of entry? And if I'm not feeling it, that's okay. Right? I don't have to, but I just kind of give myself like, there's just a really easy little, like, I'm just gonna color these geometric patterns. I'm just gonna, I'm just gonna make shapes or something, and I'm gonna listen to somebody else talk about something that they came up with that's creative, and maybe that will get my juices flowing. But it's a matter of getting out of passivity. It's a matter of getting out of like watching the world happen around me, and stepping just a little bit into, I'm doing something now to engage with the world. And it's simple and it's easy, but I'll just go ahead and do this. And as we mentioned, that a lot of times it will get the ball rolling, and all of a sudden now the little tiny snowflake becomes an avalanche. So that's what I do, is I don't put a lot of pressure on myself. I don't feel perfectionistic. I don't feel like I'm hovering. Like, that's one of the things we do to kill our children's creativity, is hover over them. Well, I don't hover over myself, right? Like, I'm not like, oh, you should be doing this better. It's just like, if I was a 2-year-old, what would I be doing? I'm just going to do that. And then oftentimes I find that creativity will follow that.
Brilliant. Love those. Mariana, please share. What do you do when you get hit with a roadblock in creativity?
Well, luckily for me, I don't do as much as creative work as Antonia does, because I tried that in the past and it did not sit well with me. Creating content, writing blogs, all of that used to put a lot of pressure on me. So I quickly got myself out of that so that I can do something else. And yes, I agree. When I do, let's say my husband wants me to do a project at work that will enhance our culture or change it around or do something well for it. And in that moment, I do have some ideas, a lot of them. Sometimes I write them down, sometimes I record myself, but sometimes I'm just running dry. And there's two ways I go about it. One is I just give it a rest, like Antonia said. I realized that it's, putting pressure on myself, and I used to put a lot of pressure on myself. It goes with my personality type, as Antonia knows. Beating myself up, it's a expertise. However, when I am ready, or when I'm supposed to be ready and I'm not yet, what moves me is that whatever it is that I'm about to embark on will be of service of others. So the longer I wait and the longer I, like Antonia said, hover over myself and feel bad for myself and, how it's not the time or my juices are not flowing, I snap out of it thinking, wait, how is this that I'm creating right now? How is this project that I'm about to develop and put in action going to help others? It will help our employees. It will help the overall culture. It will help the company. We will serve our customers better, and we will eventually serve the world better through our customers, thousands and millions of people. And just that idea of something, a small step of me creating the project and seeing it through, and actually having a ripple effect through the world, that gets me going like nothing else. It's the contribution effect of it, gives the juices, flowing, as you can see. So that's what I do.
That's extraordinary, that the world is waiting with bated breath for what you have to impart. And so get cracking.
Yes. Nicely said. I love that.
Yeah. I know that, so for, last year I had a chance to interview Andrew Jones, who is a psychedelic artist, and I'm always curious about where creative people get their inspiration, what do they do, how do they grow up, things like that. And if I could just share that, when I spoke to him, I asked him, how do you think this whole how your creative juices just started flowing? And one of the things he attributed it to, and something that I think that that will resonate for all of us, is, he grew up in a farm. There was lots of space to just run and play around greenery, around, he was in more of a green belt, but, if you're on the beach. John Medina, who is a neuroscientist, talks about when we're not in action. If we are not in physical action, it's a form of depression. So being in spaces that can, like nature, being in, get moving so that we can at least get our bodies, just basically how our mind affects our body and our body affects our mind. And now there's science behind that. I mean, psychoneuroimmunology is talking about the mind-body connection. And if your mind's not in a good place, then your body isn't. And if your body isn't, then it feeds into your mind. So we know this, but just remembering to do it. Like, go out and take a walk, get physical. For me, if I'm not feeling creative, gosh, I tend to do things that are still physical. I tend to dance. I love interpretive dance. I love, the kids love watching me because I get a good laugh, and I just do complete madness, and or I play music really loud, and I just do whatever comes into my body. And I find that being in my body allows me to feel relaxed, allows me to feel elated, and I'm sure that contributes to my own creativity is when I'm in that type of space, as opposed to feeling like there's nothing about creativity that seems like there's contraction around it, like tight, anxious creativity. It's loosey-goosey. It's softy-wafty. It's like go with the flow. And so what allows me to do that is being in my body and not in my head. And that's why I think dance helps. So, as an idea, as we wrap this up, interpretive dance. There you go. Some good old interpretive dance. Anyways, that's a wrap for us today. Love talking about creativity. Very interested in your comments and what do you do when you're like maxed out on your creative powers? What do you do to like get the juices flowing? And how do you stay creative? We'd love to hear your comments in the comment section below. So that's all for us today. See you next time.